Hey everyone, welcome to The Seven Eighths, a podcast to share stories on failures and rejections. There may not be any fairy tale endings in this podcast. My guests aren't past the mountain of struggle. In fact, some of them might still be in it. I hope this podcast serves as a forum for friends and acquaintances to exchange tales of defeat. Defeat that make the 7/8ths part of our lives. You know, like the part of the iceberg that you can see. By sharing these stories, I hope we can all normalize failures and hence win over that fear of defeat. Because failing is just a part of living. I hope you will relate. Do leave me a note of feedback, and critique is welcome as well. You can find me on Twitter @FamNectar. Now, on to our episode. Welcome to episode 17 of The 7/8ths. In this episode, I sit down with Vikrant Karnik for a conversation about his struggles and failures. Vikrant Karnik, VK, is now responsible for the global cloud services business at Genpact. Prior to joining Genpact, he led Capgemini's global digital and cloud services business in the financial services strategic business unit. He has managed and delivered complex digital transformation, public and hybrid cloud deployments since 2009, when he was involved in the first cloud bursting pilot with Capgemini and AWS. In our conversation, VK and I talked about his struggles with transition, moments of self-doubt, struggles with outcomes that don't align with his vision, and much more. He candidly chatted about signing up for challenges larger than life and the fear of being able to deliver on a commitment. I would love for you to listen in. So how are you, VK?
Can't complain. You know, the world is opening up. Took my first flight to Seattle a couple of weeks back. My leadership team thinking about doing a face-to-face leadership meeting in New York. So things like that, things are opening up. Business generally is good. Digitization is the forefront. And my business is all about digitization. So can't complain on the work front.
So I reached out to you, VK, because you and I, we connected like almost 12, 13 years ago. And I've always seen you to be a superstar. I mean, this was back at Cap. I moved on from Cap, I think 3 years into Cap. And then you stayed at Cap. You kind of rose the ranks, so to speak. And I've always been impressed at how you've taken your career. And also personally, I know you've been through difficult moments, but how you've managed to navigate through those experiences. So when I started this show, you've always been one of the guests that I wanted to have on this show. Because knowing what I know now, I can only imagine how difficult it would have been for you to continue to navigate those struggles, those setbacks, and continue to tell the story that you're telling to yourself and even to the rest of the world, right? So thank you for agreeing to be on The 7/8ths.
Oh, you're very welcome. No, thank you for having me on. It was always fun working with you, and then seeing how you've developed this project of passion is phenomenal. It's very encouraging to watch. So I'm glad to be here. I'm excited to be here.
It's all towards sharing stories of struggles, rejections, and helping normalize it. Even someone that is so successful, there are difficult moments that they have to go through, and that's what I want to share on this podcast. So coming to you, how was childhood? You grew up in India, right?
Yes, I grew up in Bombay, Mumbai. It was the classic middle class family, right? We had enough, but there was never excess. The values, the culture, education is very important. Respecting your elders and following, and so it was always the same set of morals. And so I was very fortunate. Obviously fortunate to have great parents who pushed me and mother who believed in me, because boy. So in school I was a little bit notorious for pushing boundaries. I was a little bit mischievous, sort of would push boundaries of what I could do, what I couldn't do, that kind of thing.
I ask about childhood because, like you rightly said, that what we are today may be very different from what we were when we were younger, but some of the beliefs and our approaches is colored by the experiences we've had as children. So what was your earliest recollection of a setback, that made you pause and think, whoa, is this how it feels? Is this how it hurts?
That's a very good. Now I'm going to go back like 6th or 7th grade. So maybe it was not such a big setback or anything, but I remember it because it's an important grade transition, going from 4th grade in primary school to middle school and middle school to high school. Yeah. There was a course, an exam, which was parallel to the 7th grade. And going from 7th to 8th, I had made that transition. But while that was going on, there was this certificate course. And I didn't do very well on that. And I didn't get that certification exam. But I hadn't cleared this other certification exam. I mean, you could see the disappointment on my mother's, I could feel it. And I'm like, whoa, I didn't expect it to be this much. But then you also feel a little bit of expectation saying, hey, this is what my mother expected from me. And, didn't do it that well, that kind of thing. The setback I faced with more how my mother reacted to it. And I still remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. How was high school after that? Was there anything that you did, high school and college? You did your undergrad in India as well, right?
Yes. It was frankly uneventful. I mean, it was a lot of fun. I enjoyed it. And I was able to balance sort of what I did with my engineering, with this Bhavishya Jyoti, and everything had to hang in balance, right? You do well here, you do well there, and you would struggle somewhere else. So, but it was fun.
So with that string of successes in undergraduate, how did you choose to leave that string and come to the US?
Well, for all of us who have come from India, where you lead very sheltered lives, you don't know how to operate a washing machine or even, pick your own clothes, right? I mean, that's what your parents did. First of all, it was very, it created a sense of freedom, right? Oh, I can do all these things. But at the same time, onerous because you had to make your own decisions, choices, and everything. And so it was a little bit mixed feeling.
I worked with you, so I can say this, from personal experience. There was never a faltering step that you made, at least from someone that was just looking at you from the outside, right? Very decisive. You almost knew how every road turns, diverges, converges. And I was always fascinated by how you knew this already. So I never saw you take a misstep. But now I think I might have had a veil.
Absolutely.
When I was looking at.
Yeah. So it's first of all, I am glad I was able to mask all of that so well that maybe it was your inexperience of not being able to see it through. So any job is hard, right? Every job is hard in its own right and everything else. What I find fascinating about consulting is that no client hires a consultant because they know their stuff. I mean, the client hires the consultant because they don't know something and they want somebody who knows something to tell them about it. It always was very challenging. And the problem always was that because I was relatively young. In fact, what had happened was before I moved to Genentech, when we met, I was part of a big global account, the HP account. And the HP account was a very profitable account, literally kept the business, which was then Ernst & Young Consulting, afloat because it was a pretty fabulous account. It was run by 4 partners, and I was the only senior manager who was responsible for the delivery. And they always treated me as an equal. So I always had an equal voice and vote and everything else towards what we're doing in the account. And it was a very successful account. It was a $120 million account. So we're doing a lot of work. And I always thought, how can you not see all the work I'm doing? But from an external perspective, it looked like, hey, these 4 guys are sheltering him, and that's why he's performing. And I remember I was passed over for my promotion. And that time, the general manager of the US business was Salil Parekh. And he's a wonderful leader. I have a lot of respect for him. I still am very well connected with him, even though he moved over to Infosys. And his point was, how do I know that you're growing this individually? I mean, what is your contribution? So his point was, move over to an account where we can see the impact of your work. And that account was Genentech, because we had a large deal on the table there. And I remember he was like, okay, VK, it's pretty straightforward. You win us this deal. And it was a $100 million deal on the table. It was a very large deal. You win us the deal. And I was working with Pagan. She was a very senior partner. You win the deal, you make partner. You lose the deal, not only do you lose your job, but we have no West Coast, because that, we have no West Coast office, because that was, we needed something like that to keep that West Coast business running.
I have a question here for you. When you were passed up for that promotion, right? How did you feel?
I feel very hurt. Because the reasons they gave me were so flaky, right? They're like, oh, you can do more. You have this all many years in front of you. I'm like, wait a second. Because there was another chap who was 10 years older than me who made it, because they only had one slot between the two of us, who actually didn't last that long. But and my point was, wait a second. You don't need to sugarcoat that. You can just tell me that, hey, this guy was more valuable than you. It's okay. I mean, I understand. And so it was it was a very bitter moment for me, right? Because until that point of time, I was this,
rising star.
I had navigated through a massive meltdown in 2003. I mean, 2003 was brutal, because I was running delivery. So I was truly managing the P&L of that account, right? And I did all kinds of things to make that account work. And it was a joint effort with the partner. But I was like, how can you not see all the stuff that I've been in? I felt very disappointed at that point of time. I was like, bitter. But then, my view on that piece was, and that's shaped a little bit of my thinking forward, was like, well, if they can't see it, I just got to show it to them. I can't blame them if they didn't see my worth effectively. That means I need to do a better job at sort of showcasing my worth, making sure my worth is visible in the right places with the right people. And I can choose to be bitter about it, or I can do something about it. So I went to Salil and said, what do I need to do to make it, right? Because you can't give me, don't try again later, or yes, no. And to give him credit for where everything is due, he was very upfront. He said, you got to do this, you do this, you make it. And I did that, right? It was a tough fight. I was very fortunate that I was working with some very seasoned leaders. Pagan was wonderful. She was a great leader, sort of coached me around what things to go after, right? And in Genentech, it was, how do you build cancer-saving drugs at size and scale, and how do you build inventory management and production processes and everything else to support that? I mean, who teaches that in school?
Yeah.
And if you remember, Genentech did a fabulous job of sort of explaining to us what their mission was, right? I mean, I don't know if you remember, but they had this big hall where they would have the cancer survivors come and talk about what the program impacts. And every one of those sessions, I would be like, oh my God, this is at stake. And those were tough times, because we were dealing with a very savvy customer, right? Genentech knew exactly what this program meant for Cap, CGEY. They knew exactly who they wanted. And, I was sort of the person who had sold the deal and hence delivered the deal. Talking about setbacks. So first, yes, we sold the deal. That was great. In spite of all the challenges, I was learning a lot, and I was being exposed in so many different places, because it's a little bit like, I think I know this part, but in reality I don't know this part. So I had to learn enough, acknowledge it. So it was a very trying period for me personally, right? Because on one side, I'm this very self-confident, self-aware person, and then I'm getting exposed and shown up in areas where I thought I knew everything very well. So it was quite character building. That's what that's what Pagan would say. Think of it as character building. And I was like, I think I have enough character building done for some time. It's I was very fortunate. We had some very good talent. Michael, who you worked with, Yevgeny, who we brought over from Russia. I mean, we had a superstar team, and it was quite a bit of learning. And I can tell you a lot of stumbling before getting up and learning. Yeah.
What was the fall?
Oh, many falls. There was a point in time. So what we had was we had first been awarded a phase of the work, right? The detailed design. Yeah. And then it was up for us to win the implementation. Now, technically, we were supposed to have won all of it. They had awarded it. But if we messed up on detailed design, then they had a chance to kick us out. Mm-hmm. And we were punching way above our weight class. Way above our weight class. So I don't know whether you were there during the detailed design part, but there were fights. I mean, verbal fights, because, on one side you had the leadership, which was more worried about, let's make sure we conserve expenses. And I'm like, and then people were complaining, saying, you're making us fly here and there, you're making us stay here. So there was a point in time where we thought that we had overshot our budget by 20%. And I remember that, and as I told you, it comes back to our accounting was not very stellar. Mm-hmm. So I remember there was this whole incident, the meltdown, and everybody's shouting and screaming and everything else. And I'm trying to reconcile spreadsheets. Like, something's not adding up. There's like 1.2 missing in all of this piece. And it was like, no, that is right. Everybody's involved. And the West leader and Lanny was that time running North America. And it's all kinds. And then we finally found out it was actually an accounting error. And we were actually nearly 30% and 30% under. I mean, the way I looked at it was treated as a learning experience, right?
Mm-hmm. How did you manage the transitions? You grew pretty rapidly after that, right? Like when I met you, I think you were still a senior manager, if I remember right. And then you grew pretty rapidly. And from there on, like, it's a step function change, right? It's not a linear.
My whole point, Amruta, was that, if I'm going to work so hard, and I work hard, I wanted to enjoy the work I did, right? So I'm a big believer in, shape rather than being shaped, right? So shape your job, shape your role rather than somebody else doing it for you. So the challenge with that is when you try to shape your new job or shape your position or something else, you have to take risks, because a lot of times those things are non-existent positions. It can be pretty challenging. So I remember when I was tasked to sort of build the strategy for Cap as to how to work with the new players. I actually had a point in time, I thought I had quit and I was going to join Deloitte, but then some leaders in Cap intervened and said, we don't want you to leave. What would you like to do? And I said, hey, I enjoy the global function, the global role, and which is what I did when I was part of HP. And they offered me a role to provide strategy direction around who are the partners we should work with. VMware was, at that point of time, EDS had just been bought by HP. And HP was one of our biggest partners in outsourcing. So the question was, how do we build a relationship with EMC VMware so that we could counter those guys? And then there's all these new guys, some company named Salesforce. And see, my job there was to be the person who sits in San Francisco and talks about a company which sells software over the internet to a bunch of Frenchmen who live in Paris, never heard of this company, and their whole perception is some giant of a human being walking around talking, giving speeches, right? Which is what Mark Benioff did. So there were a lot of times where I thought I had the courage of, that is it, this is going to happen. And I had to take it to Paul Ermelin, who is the chairman CEO, and say, you really have to meet this person because this is what, and then, people would brush you off and Paul would say, why are you wasting my time? That kind of thing. Because that was my job, right? To get insight into what is happening and then give it back to a bunch of technocrats who were living in Europe and not exactly exposed to all of that technology. So that was, again, a lot of character building. There was a point in time where there was an incident where EMC and VMware had a relationship with Cisco, and they created this company called VCE, which was the start of the converged infrastructure. And Joe Tucci, who was the chairman of EMC and was a big partner, big proponent of VCE, came to Paul and said, Paul, I'll give you access for 2 years to all the aftermarket services around VCE.
Wow.
It's a guaranteed $1 billion business.
Mm-hmm.
And Paul said no. And
What?
I'm like, what? How can you? Why? Where? I have stories. I have so dealing with setbacks, because you think, look, what a perfect opportunity. This is going to be this big. We're going to be in this space, and for a specific reason, corporate decision, they said no. We're going to pass on it. I was again very despondent, right? I mean, when you put your heart and soul into putting that business plan together around how and why that is needed, and and you think it's such a sure deal. I mean, how can you not? I mean, every SI firm looks for high growth, right? So you've got a high growth business, which is all laid out in front of you. The risk is mitigated. The investment risk is. How can this go wrong? And it did. And it was pretty tough. But that was also nature of the kind of jobs and kind of risks I was taking. Because that's who I am as a person. I would rather do something where I'm incubating, transforming, changing. If I'm just operating, it bores me. One thing I learned is if I'm doing all those things, then I need to be prepared to deal with the fall, right? Because when you take a risk, not all the time are you going to make it over the chasm, right? Sometimes you're going to slip and you're going to fall and you're going to hurt. But if that is a conscious choice as a career, as something which defines you, then you also have to be prepared that this is going to be a byproduct quite a many number of times. And you got to be able to learn and say, hey, okay, dust it off, try again, once again, and go for it.
How do you not let that affect you? The increasing number of rejections, the increasing number of faults. How did you let that not self-doubt, like put you in a position of doubting your own strengths?
So that, Amrita, that is something you want to build as a character, as one of your attributes of character, right? But if you are a person who's geared towards taking risks and trying new things and creating new, I'm not talking startups or anything else, right? It can be as simple as starting a restaurant or a new exercise habit or whatever else, right? So if you're geared towards starting something new and being involved with innovating or transforming something, if that is what gears and that is what motivates you, then what you cannot have happen is the self-doubt creep in. Because to take that push forward, that leap forward, does require having an immense amount of self-belief.
Did you go through a phase of self-doubt?
Always. Of course. A lot of times, right, when I created new business, like in 2011, I was talking to Salil about, we don't do enough to grow this business. Digital is the new world and this and that. And he said, you can complain to me, I'll hear you. I mean, I've known you, I'll hear you, but you're going to come to me with a solution. So what I told him is, I have a solution and I will be your leader for driving that solution. I said, you need a dedicated team whose job should be to go out and evangelize and do sort of the architecture work, the solution engineering for digital-based projects, whether it is Salesforce, whether it is Amazon or whatever else. I said, great, here is some money, go hire 2 or 3 people, start working. And I built it. But in the beginning, it was tough because his view was you need salespeople. And my view was no salespeople need. The point really was, how do I build this expertise in the organization? How do I sort of have the conviction of my beliefs and push it forward? And there was a point in time where I was like, I really messed up on this one. This is not going to happen. People don't want to buy cloud. This is 2011.
You said people don't want to buy cloud?
In 2011, nobody had everybody was laughing at me. In fact, the first deal we sold, complex deal, was in Australia. And that sort of turned it like, okay, now I believe it. Let's keep pushing it forward. So what I've learned over that period is, see, don't confuse strategy with tactics. That is definitely, cannot let strategy get confused with tactics, because tactics you can change, strategy you cannot. And then the other thing is, you got to be ready to cut your losses when you feel you're at a point in time. You cannot have any sacred cows, because if you don't, then you are sort of in a self-belief system which always goes on, and at some point in time you're wrong. A lot of times you're wrong. So how are you ready to cut your losses? And you got to be very brutal about it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And then following Cap, you recently moved to Genpact after more than almost 2 decades, right?
Yes, 22 years. I was at Cap, and I moved to Genpact. That's another part of the risk-taking and shaping journey. When the Genpact opportunity came up, first I was very impressed by who I was interviewed by. I don't know whether I told you this, but my first interview was with 3 women. And I told them, before I get started, I got to tell you, I don't think I've been in a professional meeting where there were more than 2 people and I was the only male in the meeting. It's just refreshing to see, that, and obviously the people were wonderful. I really enjoyed the conversations with the leadership, and that's when I said, hey, let's try this. So here I am.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the challenging times here? I mean, you've known everyone at Cap, right? And here you are. You build from foundations.
I mean, you got to learn. I've always loved technology, so I gravitated towards that, and I built up strength in technology and everything else. So I come to this organization which is like allergic to technology, right? They are process outsourcers. Everything works Six Sigma. Let's talk about signal noise ratio. So it was a big change, but it was fun, because the way I looked at it was, I said, I've got to approach it, because to see that this is something I'm learning as part of, this is a new skill I'm acquiring, I'm learning. And that is frankly what has been fun. And that sort of allowed me to look at it from a different perspective. See, every challenge you can look at it and say, oh, I'm so overwhelmed by it. I'm like, this is just going to destroy me. I'm just overwhelmed by it. I cannot, woe is me, this thing is about to fall apart. I mean, you can easily look at that in any problem, any failure, and say, and by the way, it is a very valid response. You should do that, because some of it is about, whether it is a loss of a relationship or a loss of a deal or you should mourn it. Mourning is important. Yeah. But you cannot let it linger so much that it starts affecting your sense of self-worth. Because if it starts affecting your sense of self-worth, then what I think the challenge then becomes is, it starts then limiting your ability to perform to your potential. Sense of self-worth is very important. That drives self-belief, confidence, and everything else. And it's if you don't do it right, it can lead to all kinds of challenges.
Yeah. What are you looking forward to?
Well, I'm looking forward to finally having a life after this pandemic, where everything was locked up and everything. I'm really looking forward. We love traveling. Because my wife's from Serbia, and we love Europe. I'm a big history buff. I love history, so I always love to travel, because that's where you see history happening and everything. And so I'm looking forward to things opening up and us being able to travel like we used to before.
Are you afraid of any challenges? Are you afraid of anything that's coming your way that you feel like you have to prepare for?
I mean, if I have to prepare, I have to, lots of things I have to prepare for, but am I afraid? Afraid is too strong a word. See, I am a person who's excited by challenges. That's just who I am and how I'm wired, right? in jobs and roles, you talk about what are the different challenges. Are we going to do something different strategically, which will test you in different ways? It is a big challenge. It is a big question, but those are all things which excite me. I'm not afraid of it.
Yeah. Well, this was fun. I know it's pretty late in the night for you, so I really appreciate you staying up late and giving me a chance to talk to you and walk through the experiences that you've had, sharing stories of struggles and rejections. It's fascinating to know that even someone that appears to be so sure of yourself and so self-aware and so confident, like I said, like every curve that a lot of us don't even see, to realize that even you go through moments of self-doubt. So thank you for sharing it, and thank you for helping normalize failures.
Oh, no, I'm glad to be here. First of all, thank you for having me on. If there's one thing I would leave you with, or your listeners with, is failures are really your stepping stones, right? That's where you learn new skills. And not all failures always lead to successes, even though that's what we've been led to believe. Some failures can lead to more failures.
Yeah.
And that's perfectly fine as long as you learn from it.
Yeah.
And pick up something which will eventually lead you to success, right? And not letting that affect your sense of self-worth is important.
Oh, thank you. Those were great parting words. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Amrita.
And that's how the cookie crumbles. Talking to VK helped me realize that sometimes the problem is not with our work, but the visibility of our work. It is important to move over to a new area so that we can showcase the work we're doing and the impact we're having. I also realized there will be moments of learning, despite being a subject matter expert. Such moments, to quote VK, will be character building. He also reminded me that when you take a risk, you need to be prepared to fail. If you have that personality that needs to build, then you need to remember that sometimes when you leap, you will not make it over the chasm. The trick is to forget what happened, pick up and keep going. But then be ready to cut your losses and be honest and brutal about it. Finally, mourn the loss and the failure. But don't let it affect your sense of self-worth. Because if you do that, then you're limiting your potential. Thank you for listening to this episode. Do share your thoughts. I am on Twitter @FemNectar. Until the next conversation. Cheers, guys.